So I founded ClientEarth, and this is an example of what you might do if you want to do something as a citizen. So as a citizen, what can you do? Governments aren't doing enough, we heard from Gabriel, and that's true, to stop climate change or to stop biodiversity loss. Well, the temperature is rising like that. The loss of species, or the number of species, is going like that. So we're losing species at an accelerating and extremely dangerous rate, while climate is warming at an extremely dangerous rate. Both of those are happening simultaneously. So if you wanted to do something about that, as a citizen, what would you do? For the young people in the room, you might become a lawyer. Why? Because the law gives you enormously powerful tools. And I want to talk about how we use some of those tools. So imagining that you wanted to speed up how society, say in Europe, really global society, deals with climate change, we know a lot of the technology that we could be investing in. We know that renewable energy, for example, could deliver a great deal more than it does of the energy globally. We know that in America, by a recent accounting study, that if you wanted to deliver energy in the cheapest way, you wouldn't run a coal plant. Traditionally, that was the cheapest way of delivering it. But now, building a renewable energy system and its batteries is cheaper than simply running a coal plant in terms of cost per kilowatt hour. Remarkable. So I couldn't have said that 10 years ago. Things have changed dramatically in the ability of society to actually deal with these problems in a comprehensive, technical way. Now, in order to do that, you need to invest in the right way. Nicholas Stearns, Lord Stearns, says that it's somewhere between 60 and 90 trillion of investment globally, largely in renewable energy, over the next 12 years, say. Now, if you wanted to make that happen, and you were a citizen, where would you get the leverage to do that? And I find that in law. I'll give you a few examples. What I think you have to do is you have to rewrite the rules of investment, for example, and of corporate behavior. Then you need, after rewriting the rules, to hold governments to account when they don't do enough. In addition to that, I was saying that the technology is there. Think of the technology there. The capitalist road is open. They could just do it. Naive people say, because it's cheaper to deliver energy in a renewable way, the market will just take care of it. I say naive because that doesn't take into account the enormous power of the incumbent industries, particularly coal, including in Europe, and I'll get to that in a second, which are sitting athwart the roadway. You can't get through because of the incumbents. So are governments going to do anything about the incumbents? No. The governments have a very close relationship with the incumbents. Are the new technology companies going to do anything about the incumbents? No. Why not? They're too small, and it's not their business. They don't have the resources, they don't have the capacity, they won't do it. Who is going to deal with the incumbents? Only citizens can do that. So you have to do it yourself if you want to see it happen. Then after dealing with the incumbents, then you also try and make the systems work faster and better. And for that example will take me to China. So ClientEarth is now 11 years old. I started it in my bedroom in North London. I like to say that ClientEarth was originally the size of a desk that big. We now have 160 staff, 100 of them lawyers, with offices in London, Brussels, Berlin, Warsaw, Beijing, and a small office in New York, which is to bring Americans who want to fund this global work into the fold. So we're a European entity which now works in China and also in Africa. We have work going on forests in 5 African countries. But that's the scope, 100 lawyers. We're set up as an international law firm, and it's unusual to put lawyers and charity in the same sentence, but we're a charity. So we pay ourselves charity wages. We go raise the money to do the work. What that means is that you get to set your strategic vision according to what you think is most powerful, where you will get the most leverage. Right? That's the reason we call it ClientEarth. The Earth itself, in our view, and all of you, everyone who lives on the Earth, are the clients. So the question is, how best can you serve the needs of the people? So going to the first one, which is writing rules. So an example is in Germany right now, we have just written a draft law that would require Germany to wean itself off coal by 2035 at the latest. Now, the Bundestag, the German parliament, had a committee that decided Germany should move in that direction, but didn't come up with a draft law. So to facilitate the change, we've written one, and we've handed it to, through a friend of hers, to AKK, the gal who may be the next chancellor. So she and her team are studying it. The Greens have adopted it as their draft. So that would be a change in the rules. Then Germany would have to move in that direction. They would probably go too slowly, so we would probably have to sue them. But we'll get there. Another change in the rules, pensions. So you mentioned a change in the pension rules. A lot of the work we do is very much behind the scenes. A lot of the reason the pensions regulator is changing the rules is because 4 years ago, we went around to meet the heads of pension funds in the UK, where there is an awful lot of pension money, which should be funding the future, and has been very slow to move in that direction. So we sent in our chair, who was a banker, to talk to the folks who were running pension funds, all of them middle-aged or older men, and the door would shut, and they would say, half the time, he calculated, to Howard, our chair, Howard, so is this thing about climate change real? You know? And he said he was originally concerned that they were going to be climate skeptics. They were not a single one of them. What he realized is that they had never met a peer that they could trust to answer the question. And as well as a banker, he's a physicist, so he explained it. Okay, 10 minutes into the conversation, they would say, Howard, what you say sounds very reasonable. It's likely true. But you know what? What you want me to do, which is take account of the climate change risk in investing my portfolio, because I believe fiduciary duty has been triggered by the climate change risk, is something I will not do. Conservative industry won't put my head above the parapet. I will only do it if you change the rules. So that then becomes the challenge. How do you change the rules? So we went out and we found the two best barristers, the two top barristers to the pensions industry in the country. We worked with one of them. We wrote an opinion that this guy eventually endorsed, and then we circulated it as an opinion to the pensions industry, saying they had a fiduciary duty to manage for climate risk. Many details, but that's the headline. And that began this journey towards now a change in the rules in which pension fund managers will have to look at the material risk of climate change beginning in, if I recall correctly, October. So that's examples of changing the rules. Example of holding governments to account. Governments often pass laws, particularly in the EU, that they take credit for, and it sounds great, and then no one does anything about it. Italy actually has a proverb which says, one goes to the EU to make the law, one comes home to find a way around it. You'll recognize that as a very Italian sensibility. But often the EU rules aren't followed. And here I'll give you an example that is a local example, but also then we stretched across the entirety of the EU. We wanted to demonstrate, because citizens had never brought governments to account for environmental things in the UK or the rest of the EU, we wanted to show that citizens could do this, and citizens could enforce the law against countries when they refuse to follow their own laws. We picked air pollution because air pollution was the largest public health problem, environmentally related, in the EU and indeed in the world. Something like 400,000 people a year die early of air pollution every year in the EU, 40,000 in the UK, 10,000 in London. So 10,000 people in London dying early due to air pollution. Very serious issue. The government we wrote to in 2010 saying 2010 is the deadline by which you have to be in compliance. And when I became an English lawyer, I learned that you write a very friendly letter before you sue somebody. So that was new to me as an American lawyer. So we wrote a very friendly letter saying, no doubt you understand that this obligation kicks in 2010 to reduce air pollution. Surely you have a plan to comply because you are, after all, the government. Please do tell us what it is so that we don't have to sue you. And I got back the most astonishing letter I've ever gotten in my relatively long legal career, which was, we understand the deadline is 2010. We accept the evidence you're citing, since you're citing our own evidence, 10,000 people a year dying of air pollution every year. But we have no intention of complying until at least 2025 and probably 2030. Remarkable, remarkable. So we said, see you in court. 5 years later, we were in the Supreme Court of the UK, and the government stood up. We made the same arguments. We had lost in the High Court, lost in the Court of Appeals, remarkably. In the Supreme Court, we made our case. The government stood up and said to the Supreme Court, we have no intention of complying with the law until 2025. 15 years later, 15 times 40,000 deaths is a lot of deaths, early deaths. And the barrister said, not only that, she said, we have no intention of complying, then wagged her finger at the Supreme Court, which I recommend none of you do if you want to make and she said, and you may not order us to do so. It's very interesting. So I was in the courtroom and I thought, well, it's not every day that you precipitate a constitutional crisis. Because what the government was saying is that it was up to the government to decide how to comply with the law, when to comply with the law. It had the final judgment, and not the Supreme Court. One of the judges, a very good judge, turned to us and said, well, you've heard what the government has to say. What do you want us to do? We are only the Supreme Court. So we said, forget that this is environmental law. This could be family law, securities law, defense, it doesn't matter. If the government can come in and tell you that you can't enforce the law, you're no longer living in a democracy under the rule of law, you're living in a government by fiat and diktat. And the Supreme Court very nicely said, basically, now that you've put it that way. And they gave us the first injunction, environmental injunction that they'd ever given. So we got that, and we immediately went all over Europe bringing similar cases, same law throughout Europe. We brought 10 cases in Germany a couple of weeks later. And they were in Stuttgart, they were in Dusseldorf. We went to the heart of the German motor industry, and we won every one of these cases. Now, the first 6 cases then go up to Germany's High Court because the motor industry, which was not interested in electric at the time, was very upset. Germany's highest court says, that's fine, you win. Angela Merkel gets on the TV and says, don't worry, this opinion from Germany's highest court isn't as important as it looks. I think I've never been so lucky. This is really great. This is incredibly more important even than I thought it was. Then what happens is, a week later, we've written a letter to the mayor of Rome, one of the many cities, all of the big European cities have the same problem. And the mayor of Rome has a press conference. And she says, she only got a letter. She says, citizens of Rome, and at least I imagine her saying, she's Italian, citizens of Rome, I've been thinking, and what I've been thinking about is air pollution. I am going to voluntarily ban diesel, which is exactly what we got the judges to say in Germany. The judges said, we will ban diesel in Düsseldorf and Stuttgart. The mayor of Rome takes it upon herself. So you get a number of things happening. This illustrates making countries and regions abide by the law. It also shows a shift in economics, because within a few months, diesel car sales had fallen more than 20% in Germany, as well as in the UK after our victory here. So next is incumbents. So what about the incumbents? So you have RWE in Germany, for example, wanting to build new coal-fired power plants. In Poland, when we started, there was a fleet of 30 new coal-fired power stations the government wanted to build. Desperately stupid idea. They wanted to renew all of the Russian coal-fired power stations from the 1940s and early 1950s. Now, they didn't listen to reason, so we had to sue every one of these. And this is what you do. This is part of the incumbent business. So this is hard work. We were denounced by the Treasury minister. We were investigated by the secret police. Head of the office got death threats from the secret police. And we found out that the reason they were investigating us was they believed that the only reason anyone could oppose coal in Poland was if they were agents of Gazprom, the Russian gas company. 3 years later, after we'd started winning all of these cases, the same extremely right-wing business newspaper that had denounced us as being eco-terrorists invited the head of the office to write a half-page editorial on the clean energy future for Poland. So very interesting. You can actually shift the dialogue in the culture by winning against the incumbents. Then people see there is an alternative future. And then the next thing, that's an example. There are many examples of attacking the incumbents successfully, but you need to do that because no one else will get them out of the way so that the guys producing the clean stuff can actually succeed. And then working on making the system more, react better, react more quickly, more nimbly, improving the legal system itself. The example here is China. So in China, you'll be aware, I mean, we read only terrible things about China in the Western press, but China is undergoing an astounding change with respect to environmental issues. And I didn't know this by reading the Western press. I was invited in 2014 to give a seminar to members of the Chinese Supreme Court. They were writing a new law to allow citizens to bring environmental cases against polluting companies. And I thought I could work with these people. I love these people. And then they went on to produce this very good law. I helped them write it. I went back a few months later and they said, all of the work you did with us and then afterwards, we liked so much, we've put it directly into the Chinese law. I said, I've never had a meeting begin like this, you know. And the senior judge said, well, what do you want to do next? And I said, well, you've just created, amazingly, a court system of 3,000 environment court judges, all the way from the local level to members of the Supreme Court. They need training. And he said, they sure do. You can't imagine how important that is. This is all new. Would you be willing to train them? And I had never trained a judge, but you know, you have to be entrepreneurial. The thought goes through your head. How hard can that be? So I said, sure. Where shall I start? And they said, with us. And I said, you mean the Supreme Court? And they said, yes. And I said, great, what do you want to learn? And they said, okay, we know that you're one of the experts on climate change litigation globally. Come back and teach us a seminar on climate change litigation. I said, well, gladly. But why? What's the thought behind that request? And it blew me away. They said, what we want to do is know the best that's happening in climate change litigation around the world so that we can foster climate change litigation in China so that we can decide the world's best climate change cases so judges can take part in addressing climate change. That's our job. If we want to serve the needs of the people, we have to stop climate change, and you can help us. Amazing. So we started this dialogue. Then the prosecutors, the federal prosecutors came to us, and they said, we love, or rather, the judges love what they're getting from you. Could you train us? After getting away with training judges, I said, sure. But what do you want to learn? And they said, well, all the environmental cases are pretty new to us. That would be very good. But that law you helped write, you know, allows us to sue the government for the first time. We've never been able to sue the government. You sue governments all the time, and you always seem to beat them. So could you teach us to sue the Chinese government? I said, gladly. So now they have the right to sue on behalf of the people. So if you're in Yunnan, you know, and the air is dirty because the Ministry of Environment locally isn't clamping down on polluters, they now have the right to sue the government on behalf of the people. So we taught them, and many seminars and so on. And then we went back in January and said, or my team in Beijing did, and said, how's it going? You know, how many cases have you brought in your first year of doing this? And they said, well, you know, we've had a very poor start. We haven't brought many cases. And I love their self-critical quality. You know, that hasn't changed since the Mao era, you know, the self-critical part. But the answer was amazing. I said, okay, how many? They said, only 48,000. Okay. So in year one. let's look into those statistics. That means 48,000 cases initiated by sending the letter of notice that, unless you agree to all of our terms, you will be in court. Yes. I said, okay. How many settled? They said, 70-something%. I have the exact numbers at home. I said, well, that's very good. What about the rest? Well, of the rest, we've picked the ones that we think need to really go to court, and we've gone to court. I said, okay, of those, what's your percentage of victory? 99%. Well, there must be one they lost. I said, is that just because the judges, do everything you say? Quite the contrary. You're training the judges. That's what they said. No, we're only taking the cases we really think we can win, because next year we want to increase the number of, and greatly increase the percentage of those who settle. We want to go up from 70% to 90%. It'll be much more efficient. I thought, what a great strategy. And I said, and here's the real killer. Of the percentage that you sent letters to, what percentage were the companies and what percentage were government entities? And it was over 70% that were government entities. So remarkable. So whether or not I'm allowed officially to call it a revolution there, it's certainly a sea change. And every time I travel there, every time I come back, I'm enormously encouraged by what they're doing. So these are just some examples, some stories of what citizens can do. What you can do by using a very powerful set of tools if your objective is to address climate change in a real way. So thanks.